Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cube Pod, episode 90, Dave, and 90th episode. I'm John Furrier with Dave Vellante. Dave, salute. Get the salute, the Dave salute,
How you doing, Johnny?
Good to see you.
Uh,
It's been a great week. Oh my God, it's been I was watching football on Sunday, Saturday night, my tech start blowing up. This DeepSeek has been taking over the internet and, really kind of so many storylines on this. I was commenting on this at a presentation I did in Silicon Valley this week, but DeepSeek is taking over the narrative, and it's from China, and so it's a whole nother thing, and it really put everyone on notice around AI efficiency and also the geopolitical thing from China. Is it a Sci-Ops thing from China? Is it open source going to change the game? There's so many storylines. Is it a breakthrough? We're going to get into this, the efficiencies. I did an interview with the chief AI officer from Cerebras. He weighed in on this. They have a clear line of sight. Amazon Web Services added DeepSeek R1. Everyone's adding it in. Apparently, it's the best in reasoning and doing some other efficiencies with chips. I called a chip grid. We'll get into that. But, I mean, just a lot of action this week. I think we'll dedicate this pod to a deep dive on DeepSeek, so much angles, and a lot of things we've been talking about. I mean, for the last two pods, we've been riffing on things like, NVIDIA's moat, and we were even going back in the history books and talking about mini computer and proprietary operating systems. And remember those debates? It all kind of played out, and then TikTok got banned for a day, and then boom, that was a China discussion. And then China launched, in my opinion, a salvo with DeepSeek, and I think it's the beginning of what we've been seeing as a kind of a Cold War, but now an arms race. We're going to get deep into that. So if you really want to get our take on DeepSeek, there's a lot of threads we've been covering as an analyst, but also commentating on, speculating around fusion models, models working together with distillation, power law of AI models we put out 2 years ago. Those predictions still stand true. In fact, if anything, has validated more of our original vision on that. So much going on in this AI arms race. Again, under the hood, just some great stuff, but also some really kind of interesting political conversations around DeepSeek. So, Dave, we'll get into that. But first, let's knock down some news because some other stuff is always going on.
yeah,
You had the Juniper lawsuit by the DOJ for blocking the HPE merger with Juniper Networks, which is ridiculous.
it's unbelievable.
And then
I mean,
IBM,
really?
Apple, Microsoft, Meta, and Intel earnings. We'll get into that. But let's just start out with just quickly unpacking what I thought was a big story, which I thought HPE should respond when I saw there was a block of that merger, which seems like a no-brainer to me. But now the
Antonio
DOJ is
responded.
suing HPE.
Antonio responded. What kills me, John, is the UK Competition Committee basically said, "Yeah, it's okay, do it." And then, they're basically saying that, oh, that HPE and Cisco would be dominating the market for fixed wireless. And I'm like, what? I mean, Cisco is the dominant networking player. Antonio responded saying that the DOJ is just narrowing the market definition way too much. I totally agree. I think this is really overreaching by the DOJ. And I don't know, which DOJ is it? Is it like the Lena Khan leftover? Or is this, Trump knuckleheads like not understanding the market? It's just, maybe it's because Antonio hasn't gone to Mar-a-Lago. I don't know. Maybe
No,
he's
I
got
mean,
to
it
go
makes
kiss
no
the ring.
sense. I mean, it makes no sense. Z.S. Carvalho wrote a post on this, and this really, even if there's no market power here, and then people are chiming in about the WLAN market, wireless local area networking, which is Wi-Fi, basically, stadiums and that kind of thing. But absolutely, I see no problem with this deal. I mean, to me, this is as uncompetitive takeover monopoly as you can see. I mean, HPE, even with Juniper, still has a huge competitor in Cisco. So if anything, Cisco is the big whale, right? So like, how does this work? I mean, it's not. It just doesn't make zero sense to me. This is again, I think a display of incompetence on the government, just bad policy. And I watched some of the Senate hearings, by the way, and you want to talk about just how there's no decorum anymore. It's just like, just forget qualifications. They want to smear people. So it's just, I don't get, like, I think we're going to swing back to this kind of the original principles of like, hey, let's get information, let's do the right thing, and let people do their business.
Can I just
And
comment on the Senate hearings for a second?
yeah,
I mean, I watched a bunch of them too. It's like, and it's the same thing whether it's a Democrat nominee or a Republican nominee, the other side just goes, when was the last time you beat your wife? Yes or no? It's a simple yes or no question. When was the last time you beat your wife? It's like, wait a minute. At one point, RFK said, Senator, you just asked me 6 questions. Just let me answer one. We don't have time. Yes or no?
No, when they try to defend, then they get cut off.
Yeah.
I got my soundbite in. No, it's basically a humiliation.
So
It's a game
dumb.
of humiliation, and they want to get the sound bites in. But if you looked at the candidates for the Trump side, they're like they're playing that we have a mandate, and they're going offensive right out of the gate. All of them, I did. I watched all of them pretty much come out gate knowing it was coming. But it's again, it just shows that the government. I think there's going to be a reset. I think people want to have a reset. I still don't think there'll be the bipartisan natural thing that happens, but the world was coming this direction. I mean, I've been saying to my kids, I've been saying as long as I can remember on the Cube that there's going to be like a hippie revolution in digital in this culture where the young generation is going to say, "I've had enough. Like you boomers left me all this mess. Come on." And so you're starting to see that narrative in that Trump traction. I mean, his approval rating in Democrats is off the charts, and most of the young kids love him. So,
There's a lot of
again,
detractors out there still. I mean,
well,
it's like,
still, but you don't see. I mean, you see a lot more of the people speaking out, and it's less hiding, right? So you're starting to see younger people just whether they're buying whatever narrative, it shows a different sentiment, and I think it is because of the obvious mistruths that have been represented on both sides, right? So it's not just Trump's side; it's just the other side too. So I think there's some things out there that young people just can't get their arms around, and I think my philosophy is just invent the future, create a new future. And there, if I was in my 20s, I'd be like a rebel too. Like, I think I would probably rebel against the system and look to create change. Steve Jobs had that famous quote, the world we live in was created by people that, were no smarter than you. And I think that applies to government. And I think it's going to be not in a Kennedy way, but I think still not yet formed, but you might see that. That's what I'm just saying. So
we'll see what happens.
point.
I mean, it could be a lot of unintended consequences of shifting, responsibilities or cutting. My fear is that they're cutting stuff for people that are protecting Americans, in whether it's cybersecurity or critical infrastructure or hopefully not terrorism. I don't know. It's just like you said, Trump's on the offensive. He blamed DEI for the crash, the helicopter and airplane collision. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe, but I don't think so.
The analysis of that is actually fascinating because people in aviation are very technical and they weigh in. It's a combination of system issues and also just common sense flight path. It's just
human error.
It's just a really, really tragic thing, but it could have been avoided. I mean, that airport, I fly into that all the time for DC. I prefer because it's a shorter ride from
it's
Dulles.
so convenient, but it's like maybe we'll be flying into Dulles.
I'm like, maybe I go to Dulles now. I mean, because the traffic there, I mean, it is so busy. I don't know why they're running training runs on Blackhawks. It makes no sense to me. They could probably do it somewhere else. And they're all wearing night goggle visions, by the way, on that too. And it's lit up heavily. So it's like, that's a whole nother thing. I don't want to get into that, but I'm scratching my head
tragic.
saying,
It's just
that was avoidable.
All of us are just
that was
hearts go out
avoidable.
to those
And
families.
so again, DOJ, government inefficiencies, we'll put that aside. I'm for HPE buying Juniper. I think that's a good move for HPE. It makes more competitive. Cisco's probably cheering, but other than that, I just again makes no sense.
But here's the thing: it was a year ago. You remember we had the CEO of HPE, the CEO of Juniper on at MWC last year, which was what, February? It's been a year. Come on, why does it take a year? If they freeze, they make all these plans. I mean, really, you can't figure this stuff out inside of a year?
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm very much against it and don't really understand it.
Before we get into the DeepSeek stuff, I want to just hit on some of these key earnings because we like to watch the bellwethers. IBM, Apple, Microsoft, Meta, Intel all released. Dynatrace as well. We covered that because they're in our observable area. They also had great earnings.
IBM guidance was really strong. I mean, I thought when I saw DeepSeek come on, I'm like, a little bit like Granite. So I thought that was pretty a nice little boost. Not that that's why the stock was up. It's up because they
I
gave good
think
guidance.
IBM just has fundamentals. We saw Arvind Krishna. We've been to the analyst meetings. We cover them. We've had one-on-ones with the executives. IBM has been, really focused on, the being that integrator and some picks and shovels in the AI wave, and they got the installed base customers. I think we've mentioned this on the pod how many times, but in AI and this transformation, you always say, the line is you win in transformation, in transitions, right? So this is IBM in a transition with the industry market shift. They have a lot of customers and they have a lot in their portfolio. So they sharpened the saw, and they did. They got good results. And, maybe that fruit is coming off the tree from Arvind's strategy. And again, he's pretty meticulous about what he's trying to do. Clearly, the long game, he said to us many times, we're playing along. The big open mind for me is what I mean. Open item for me is the developer. So IBM has the install base. Startups are trying to sell into that install base. IBM has an opportunity to bring that developer go-to-market piece in, as does the Dells of the world. And so I think that the big incumbents, Dave, are shifting from trying to win the developers to code on their platform to coding into the stack of their systems and their transformational install base. Because, people aren't changing out the tools and platforms, they're changing process, not so much changing things, and you're seeing the abstractions come in. So I think these incumbents like Salesforce, like IBM, aren't going anywhere. They got the data, they got the install base, they got the beachhead, they got the position. They're going to be brokering access to new technology. So I think there's going to be some durable incumbents. Andy Jassy used to call the old guard, the incumbents, the old guard. I think it's a good opportunity for them. So
Yeah.
I'm bullish on it. And
And the software piece is what excited me. I mean, I mean, looking back, the Red Hat I always thought that the Red Hat acquisition made sense from an IRR standpoint because I said, Stu and I were in here. Stu, of course, works for Red Hat. We did during COVID, we did analysis of the 34 billion. And at the time we said, it's really not a cloud play. Maybe eventually it could be, but it's really a play about leveraging Red Hat and OpenShift in their consulting business. And that's how this thing's going to get paid for. It was, one of Ginny, I criticized Ginny a lot, but this is on her way out. She gave, let Arvind do that. Not that I said but Arvind was going to be in control anyway. But that was a good acquisition. The numbers made sense. They paid for it very quickly because of the consulting business. And now the software side is really paying dividends. So 34 billion, a lot of people criticize that acquisition. It's, in my opinion, it was one of the best in IBM's history. Maybe will turn out even better than PwC, which essentially saved IBM back in the Gerstner days.
yeah, IBM's doing great. Apple had earnings. Meta had earnings. There was a leaked all hands. Zuckerberg was kind of like saying, every time I give on all hands, everything gets leaked to the media. So it's a bummer.
Comment on Apple. We've been saying for how long? Everybody, ebbs and flows on Apple, down on Apple. They've got such a huge install base, and their services business is like the marginal economics are like software economics, maybe even better. It's amazing, and that's what's driving their business. Their install base is growing. Maybe iPhone sales are suffering a little bit because of China, but the install base, I think, grew by over 100 million, I saw. I mean, that's incredible from the last time they reported it. So that's the service revenue, and, whether it's ear-pods and, I mean, billions and billions of dollars on products that, are relatively low cost and loved.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a big focus on how the impact of this AI shift happening quickly to the big guys. So we're going to keep watching that. We'll hear our comments on the pod.
And I heard a stat that the iPhones that did Apple Intelligence actually did better. I don't know if that's true. I got to dig into that. But if that's true, I don't have latest and greatest iPhone. Mine's a couple of generations old, and so I'm one of the reasons that people say, "Oh, Apple's in trouble," because people aren't upgrading their phones as often. But yeah, if Apple Intelligence is that good, I'm all in. I mean,
my family wasn't giving it high marks, so
yeah, I didn't think it was. I mean, it's a Siri 2.0, but so we'll see.
All right, well, let's get into the deep dive of this DeepSeek situation.
Oh, couple other things. Microsoft earnings. So, guidance and spending were the concerns there. Azure missed my forecast. Intel, beat, and everybody's excited about Intel again. The stock was up, but the revenues declined 7%. And ServiceNow kind of surprised to the downside. I was surprised to see that kind of tepid guidance, and they missed on revenue. So yeah, big earnings week, a lot of news. And then OpenAI, my gosh, we're going to talk about that, I presume, when we're going to get into DeepSeek. So,
Yeah. Well, what's your take on those earnings based on those numbers? What's your analysis?
it's kind of interesting. It's a little mixed. This happens when you go through these industry transitions. It gets very confusing. You have like some companies are doing really well, other companies are, doing okay. Those with the big install base, sometimes they struggle. IBM sort of bucked that trend. Microsoft was kicking butt. So you have all these cross currents, and it's very chaotic right now. But in general, I'm optimistic, and I think we'll get into DeepSeek. I think that we're going to learn from DeepSeek how to do things more efficiently in AI, and that's going to be a rising tide that lifts all ships finally, because AI hasn't lifted all ships, as we know. It's been kind of narrow and focused in terms of those that have really gotten benefit from it. I think to the extent that we can lower the denominator, and we're going to talk about that, the value goes through the roof.
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's in this game has invested the capex or the infrastructure. The levers are infrastructure and software, and I think the capex, whether it's data centers, AI systems, that's continuing to thunder along, and people are trying to figure out how to put production workloads on them. And it's the software innovations, I think, that's going to be key. And what got my attention with this DeepSeek was, there's a lot of salacious headlines, but I mean, at the end of the day, it was the innovation behind the model and how they did it was interesting. First thing that got everyone's attention was the cost claim. They had outstanding, numbers and this unbelievable, oh my God, $5 to $6 million all cost. That cost, hundreds of millions of dollars for OpenAI. That was the first kind of strike of the play. Which, by the way, Nvidia stock dropped on Monday, largest loss in the history of the market. If someone shorted that thing, they made tons of bank. Now, by the way, High Flyer was the company behind DeepSeek, a hedge fund, but spun out DeepSeek, and that to me could be suspicious. But again, the top stories were the training cost that was debunked, the efficiency behind the model, how they used chips and how they did some precision work, FPGAs and other chips, not just GPUs, although they had GPUs. We'll get into that. And then the broader narrative around the democratization and the commoditization of models and the CCP-linked involvement. Those were huge storylines. So, that was the table. So, DeepSeek announced that their model, and it set the stage for this conversation. Efficiency versus raw compute. Do you throw more GPUs at it? Many people are telling me that a lot of their GPUs are idle. It's like cycles are idle. So this democratization is a software innovation. It's an algorithm automation. It's an open source innovation. So this is what was the key discussion. Once the sizzle was debunked, Dave, that it went into that. So, I mean, on the surface, it looked good, but when you peel back the onion and you unpack it, it grabbed a ton of attention, 14.8 trillion tokens, and these figures grabbed attention. And then everyone's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Who actually did the analysis? There's a company called High Flyer. The founder was a member of that hedge fund in China.
Yeah, Lang Wengfeng.
And they spun out DeepSeek.
I mean, to your point, do you think he was short Nvidia on Monday?
So someone had to be. I mean, how do you fund this?
Well, exactly. I mean, I think that guy made money. I mean, I don't have any inside information or facts,
probably.
But well, I mean, I think he wanted attention. He certainly got it, and I think who knows? The Chinese government's probably right there with him, saying, "Hey, let's watch this." And they're talking about, what do you call that when you throw a little disruptive explosive, a bouncing Betty into the network. Yeah. That's what happened this week.
So it really was, crafted story. It was kind of an illusion in my mind of a low-cost innovation, and it really wasn't a low cost. They actually paid for it, and now they're tying together through our analysis and through the reporting. SiliconANGLE is High Flyer was involved, but to me, I think the real innovation was smarter, leaner, faster models, and that's what really the secret is here. And by the way, the whole China conspiracy theory, although I think this is a Psy-Ops, my opinion, but not the way people think it is. It's China getting back in the game and flexing. But this team is not just a side project; it's a legit group spun out by High Flyer. They shared resources. We'll get into the GPU audit in a minute, but this was definitely not a low cost situation. Now they did, distill off of OpenAI. We'll get into that, but to me, it was just no fluke. And here's what they did. They did a smart model design, mix of experts. That was the first big thing. The traditional AI models like OpenAI use brute force number crunching, okay, and that not DeepSeek. They did the mixture of experts. They also did the distilling of other models, so they didn't have to do the brute force crunching. And they slash memory, energy, and the time it needs to get the answers and reason with good performance, okay, without compromising performance. They get all that stuff. It's a game changer. A lot of matrix multiplication involved. So you had floating point precision in there, FP8. This is where you start to see FPGAs potentially coming into the mix. So what they did was they just did use different chips. They used H100s. They didn't use H800s, I should say, not the big expensive H100s, although they probably did do a little bit that on the big training. And they used, FP8, which is precision floating point capability. And then they did great compressed attention, which is the memory management. So current AI models chew up a lot of memory. DeepSeek avoided that with what they call multi-head latent attention. Okay, it compresses memory. So a lot of memory work. And then they optimized around H100 GPUs, which aren't as powerful as H100s. And so they optimized the chip-to-chip communication to offload the constraint of that chip, which is a memory issue. H100 is a better memory, and that's what they did. And they just accelerated their multi-token prediction, which is essentially the training time. So DeepSeek actually did something good, and that was a big deal, right? So this is why I called it the chip grid, because what they did was, it reminds me of, they did a combination of things that weren't obvious, very clever, very good engineering. I mean, I don't think it's like a breakthrough in like major way, but it was something that they did with the constraints that they had, which was they didn't have the big mother chips. So great
Well,
tell sign for
well,
me.
did they or didn't they? Right? I mean,
Well, they did use the H100s. Now, the training side, that's different. This model, lower cost, now open source, we'll get into that, but actually does really, really good reasoning. Okay. And that's why the
yeah.
precision floating point stuff is important. They actually did a lot of good, fast, low cost. And so they're changing the game on the infrastructure. Now, you want to get into the training. If you look at the data that was reported out and the analysis shows is that when you look at the number of H100s, they had, let me pull up my stats here on this one. This is worth reading because it's very specific.
Well, Dylan Patel tweeted that he said he thought they had access to 50,000 Hopper GPUs.
So the
and
semi-analysis
10,000
blog had the great report on this. He quoted, and others are validating, they had around 10,000 H100s and about 10,000 H100s
A100s.
distributed across
A100s, right?
10,000 H100s and
Yeah, and then supposedly people saying they had 10,000 A100s, but I heard
H800s. They had tens of thousands of those, and 10,000 H100, the bigger GPUs, distributed across training, inference, and research ops. So they had a distributed architecture. So, and they have orders in from what he's reporting for about, more GPUs from Nvidia, the H200s. So this is GPU sharing between High Flyer, who was the customer for that.
Yeah, but they supposedly they had access to 50,000 Hopper GPUs.
Yeah, yeah, and that's huge. That's about a $1.6 billion capex. Okay, so now that whole cost thing goes away.
Well, and you saw what happened to Nvidia's stock, and it's still bumpy. But so this guy Epstein, no, sorry, Jeffrey Epstein, Jeffrey Emanuel, put out a post, a short case for Nvidia. It was an hour-long read, so it was very, very long. And basically he made the bear case. He's a former quant, so he was probably short the stock. Of course, Chamath, who's into Grok, is loved it. But he basically didn't say anything new. He talked about Nvidia's high margins. He talked about Cerebras. He talked about alternative software. He talked about the hyperscalers doing their own chips. He said TSMC can sell to anyone they want. But I read that and I'm like, okay, but the only way that there's, to my mind, that there's a base case for Nvidia is if you believe that demand for compute power will wane because of this. And I don't. And that's where I think Satya was right on. He tweeted out or whatever, posted Jevons paradox. In this case, I don't think it's a paradox. Cost goes down, demand goes up, people buy more. To your point, AI gets more democratized. It's all about the value. So think value, very simple. You got benefit over cost. If you can lower the denominator, if Satya gets more out of his 80 billion, then that's more value. If he only has to spend 40 billion, then he's got 40 billion left over to spend elsewhere. His ROI just went up. And so I think that it's all about value and volume. And I think saying, well, TSM can sell to anybody. Well, Nvidia has the volume lead by far. And unless you don't believe that the market is dramatically transitioning to massively parallel computing, i.e. accelerated computing, if you don't believe that, okay. But if you do believe that, then the demand for compute is going to be virtually unlimited. I've been saying all week, we sent humans on the moon with a computer that had the power of a calculator, maybe even less, certainly much less than our phones. And so we've seen since the 60s, and the 70s and the 80s, demand for computing power has just been insatiable. And I don't think that's going to change.
I think it's just going to lower the cost and drive adoption. It reminds me of, the online population on the internet has got more, the performance got more. And I was talking with some entrepreneurs this week, and how the classic AI trajectory, people are like, oh, it reminds me of the web. These critical moments. The
Huh.
one entrepreneur said it reminds them of the iPhone revolution because the user experience shifted, and that drove a lot of change. And we've said it here in the pod that there's a back end, front end transition happening at the same time. It's both the infrastructure and the front end software. So the levers that are being pulled right now in this industry that are significant, where the money is going to be made and won or lost, and the battles will be established, is on the infrastructure side, which is AI infrastructure, which we've been saying and reporting on with SiliconANGLE and theCUBE research, and then on the software side, and this DeepSeek represents the software side. What they've essentially have done is they've innovated in using off-the-shelf hardware in combinations, whether it's whichever stand you have, whether they use high flyer or not. They actually did some innovation, but it wasn't like major breakthrough engineering. All they did was use the constraints of the H800s, which they could get from Singapore or whatever channels they can get into China, and they made it better. Now, that creates a different efficiency on the memory and energy, which is great, which lowers the overall cost. And now when they distilled with the algorithms with OpenAI, they have a fast model and reasoning model that allows the software to work better. So that kind of isn't important. So this is a software algorithmic innovation, in my opinion. That's going to drive a hell of a lot more demand. It's going to make the hardware more valuable. So the flywheel between the infrastructure providers, whether it's a Cerebras or Dell AI factories, they're going to move faster from what John Rose, the AI chief AI officer at Dell, calls POC purgatory. All these major projects are stuck in purgatory. They're stuck before they get to production. Now, as you have the software innovations on the front end, like that iPhone moment, you have the applications using the user experience driving in on a collision course with the AI infrastructure. And that's going to create, I think, a major uptick in usage and demand, because now viability is in there. So all the hurdles around cost go down, energy can be managed with the power envelopes. You can have 1 megawatt rack and then have little other racks. You can organize your equipment differently on the hardware side, because what they did distributedly, unlike the centralized approaches, was innovative. So I think this is a software innovation, and the fact that they open sourced it, Dave, is the key point. So people were complaining out of the gate on this DeepSeek, like, oh, China's taking over, it's a war. Why would you use it and send your information to China? Well, it's open source. You can download the weights, okay,
Yeah.
in there. Now, what they didn't tell you was it was very opaque on the training data. So there was very much some stuff that's still open that people are nervous about. Not everything's available, but you can use the weights, and you can take that and put it on your servers. So Perplexity CEO weighed in on that. He took the model from open source and put it into Perplexity. Amazon's adopted it, so it's not directly dependent on the China servers. That's false. Now, yes, the original version ties to the China servers, but because it's open source, you just grab it. So I think that's going to drive application developers big time. Totally going to crush that because, yeah, I mean, it's a little bit opaque on the open source side. That's definitely clear as far as I'm concerned. It's like, all right, where's the open source? That was the big question. Like, where's the open source, right? Okay,
Well,
training data. They didn't release the data sets, but they released the weights. The distilling process. They distilled off OpenAI's outputs. They still haven't explained it. And then,
well, you know, we're hearing, oh, they use this thing called mixture of experts. I'm like, how long have we been talking about MOE, right?
yeah,
And Amazon talked a lot about model distillation at reInvent this year and bringing capabilities. But I do think, I mean, I think it was a copy paste with some really clever ways to more efficiently use, you know, the constraints or get around the constraints that they had. But I mean, other than, you know, is it a Sputnik moment? You had said you didn't really think so.
no,
And
I
I
didn't
don't,
say that. Mark Andreessen said I was against that because he got called out. Sputnik was
yeah,
country on country, but they didn't release their plans.
right,
If Sputnik had
but
open sourced how they did it, then it wouldn't have
right, but you're
been.
saying it was not, is not a Sputnik
No, I don't.
comparison.
No,
Yeah, I
not at
agree
all.
with you. That's what I'm saying. So again, people are saying it's a Sputnik moment. You and I agree. It's different, not really the best analogy, but it does underscore that it's kind of good wake up call. Let's
Yeah.
go.
I mean, if you
You remember when in the 80s, Japan's ascendancy was freaking everybody out, and I think this is significantly more competitive because the market is so much bigger and AI is so much more important today. But to me, the winners are the market. The market overall just keeps getting bigger and bigger the lower the cost is. And I don't see Nvidia as a loser. I was surprised. I mean, I understand the Nvidia sell-off, but people that were traders in the market for years, friends of mine were texting me. It's like, DeepSeek competes with Nvidia. Should I sell? I'm like, no, wait, no, they don't compete with Nvidia. But that's what people who don't really understand think that. Oh well, it does compete indirectly. Is the logic because it means you need less
they use
compute, so they're
Nvidia's
gonna
chips,
so
and they have more coming.
they're gonna sell less is the logic, but that's flawed logic because they're just gonna Jevons paradox again. And then, I think other semiconductor vendors, it's a good thing. AMD for the edge. When you were hosting that panel
Yeah, yeah,
at New York Stock Exchange, it was all about the edge. That's where they're playing, and they got
yeah.
more memory and all that other good stuff. To your point about infrastructure players like HPE and Dell, I think they win. Software vendors and hyperscalers, I think, I think it's good. I do think, LLMs. I'm not crazy about Anthropic, as you know. Full disclosure, I'm an investor in Anthropic. Back when they had single digit billions of valuation, and I was sort of psyched when they hit 60 billion, but that's not looking so good. I think OpenAI, they're still leader. I see the article in the journal today talks value OpenAI at 300 billion, $40 billion SoftBank wants to put into them. I mean, so somebody's willing
Yeah.
to put some dough into them.
Yeah, I mean, go back to your point about the Sputnik moment. I would say that I saw a thread on X I liked. The guy was basically comparing it to more of like less of Sputnik because they actually released open source to more like when Google published their papers. Because I think what's happening here is that it's all out in the open, unlike anything that's hidden. Now they're not disclosing some of the thing, but that's more like what this is. It's very I think it's a first strike in the AI dominance war with Europe, and so I think, I mean, with Asia, with China, because I think this is the first easy disruption. disrupt the stock market, open source everything, commoditize, burn the village, get everything down, take down the big guys. In this case, OpenAI, they have to up their game. But the fact that they did this was, as I said, and then David Sachs said on TV today, it's the mother of all inventions is necessity, right? So, this is a case, Dave, where the U.S. chip restrictions might be was a blessing in disguise for them because they had to get their hands on the H800 GPUs, which they could. Okay, they're not as powerful as the H100s, but they didn't just sit there and complain about it. They just about not getting the big hardware. They innovated. They reprogrammed the H100s communication protocols, and they sidestepped via getting down to the assembly language level and managed the bandwidth limitations that held them back. So
Yep.
you could ironically, the export restrictions might have fueled the innovation.
It's like Stuxnet at Natanz, right? When the centrifuges got sped up and they discovered it, what did Iran do? They figured it out and they accelerated the nuclear program. And so it's
like when the PC started. This, in the garage, they just took off the shelf chips and made a smaller computer because their constraint was they didn't get the big mini computers back when Steve Jobs and Wozniak did that. IBM, same thing. That was kind of skunk works, but this is what they did, and what that unleashed is, and their innovation was an algorithmic innovation, which was how they got the model to work, right? So because of the hardware constraints that they had to kind of innovate around, they actually saw a breakthrough on the algorithmic side, with software side. So this is a software efficiency game, and I think that's going to change. That's why all the people that were responding were either the Perplexities of the world or the chip folks, because they're like, wow, I could actually integrate the model. Folks like hardware manufacturers like Dell, they work on like how many MIPS can I get out of the power, right? They're not really, this doesn't impact them as much other than they can make their stuff run faster.
Well,
but if you're Perplexity and if you're like Cerebras, you're a chip folks, Cerebras people love this because they go faster. They can do more to your Jevons Law piece. They are more efficient with the efficient software.
I mean, to your point, it's instructive to look at how these companies responded. Nvidia was like, cool, this is innovative. IBM is, saying that like, hey, this is sort of justifies granted. AWS, Microsoft, I think IBM as well, Dell, I think Michael Dell tweeted out, they're all running DeepSeek. Look, we can run DeepSeek in Bedrock. The software vendors, like Salesforce, they're happy about it. And look at Anthropic. Anthropic said, oh, the US government should go after China. So because they're threatened, OpenAI, you stole from us, which is ironic because they were trained on the internet. But again, they have, like we just said, a $300 billion valuation potentially, raising $40 billion with SoftBank. So that's why I think they're TBD. But the response from these companies has generally been, if you're on the AI curve, the response has been generally positive. And
yeah, but the conversation shifted from stock price to the future of AI, because I think the short-term kind of radius blast of this was stock price impact. So, well, what's the competitive? And then the conversations around Nvidia mode and this, that, the other thing. But I think the deep conversations here in Silicon Valley and in the AI community is, what is the real future of AI? And what you're starting to see is some of the things we've been saying on theCUBE here all the time, which is it's a systems revolution. So you have, I call it the chip grid emerging, which is like clustered systems, where it's not about throwing gear at problem or GPUs, it's the combination of the hardware configuration. And what they did with the chips that they had was they didn't have the big chips. They used the little less capable, but still good chips. And they went to the low-level assembly language and tweaked it. Now, that's clever and good hack, if you will, but it was the software side that grew it. So what they showed is that efficiency beats spending, right? And if you look beyond the current landscape, the AIs that can continue to grow, the AI models are continuing to grow in complexity, size, specialty models, and this fusion of models, which we've been predicting, by the way, on theCUBE. I've been saying this since cows were coming home. Like, look models will interact. And what they are proving is their distillation with OpenAI and the existing models was they essentially sucked out the value, like a child from the parent, the information, and learned at the lower cost. That's software. Now, if you're going to do this at scale, you can buy all kinds of new chips. Remember, we had the conversation with Charlie Kawase at Broadcom. It's what's around the chips that matter, right? The chips. So a grid configuration like this is like off-the-shelf chips, FPGA. This is kind of where the infrastructure is going. So it's not about just getting an NVIDIA GPU. It's GPU plus memory plus all this other stuff around it, open standard Ethernet or whatever that is, and then the software to run it. To me, this is, I think, a big kind of aha moment and threatens things like, I'm going to say it, CUDA. CUDA's moat. Can CUDA be replicated in open source?
Well, that's what everybody's saying. I mean, that's what this guy, Jeffrey Emanuel said. He said, again, same arguments, but that's not a new argument, right? I mean, maybe this is, like you say, a wake-up call that says, hey, the art of the possible, but we'll
remember
see.
IBM made custom their own silicon for the mainframes and mini computers, and then Intel had the small little chip. I mean, Intel started out making memory, right, from the spin out of their from Fairchild, and so
I remember.
And then this little chip, and then there was other chips, and then the PC was essentially just a combination of off-the-shelf chips that made a computer work. Now, granted, it was like, elementary. Everyone's watched the history of Apple, whether you read the books or watched the movies. They're in the garage, and they put together a motherboard and shipped a wooden PC box, basically the first prototype. To me, this is a larger scale version of that, where they actually did the kind of innovative configuration that brought in the software. Again, the two levers, hardware and software. And this is what, again, that's a big story. And all this training costs and reasoning. I think there'll be leapfrogs, Dave, on that. I mean, you're seeing the leaderboard on change almost every day. It's like watching the horse race, like in the lead, this one comes back, falls ahead. I think you're going to see a lot more of that kind of like leapfrogging.
It could be different this time around, but the history of silicon, you mentioned IBM. IBM was the dominant silicon player. They had the best price performance. They had the volume. I mean, this is back in the mainframe, so the volume wasn't that high. But they dominated, and then they handed, to your point, the monopoly to Intel, because they said, let's outsource, because these are little toys. Let's outsource the microprocessor. What happened? Volume and value. And Intel became a monopoly and had monopoly power. And I believe that Nvidia has a similar dynamic in its business, and it's even more powerful because of its software advantage. And again, I think it's about value and volume. Now, the difference this time around is open source wasn't there to disintermediate Microsoft. It eventually did, by the way. Yeah. I've always argued that Linux is what, really unseated Microsoft's dominance when Microsoft went sideways for 10 years before Satya came in and transformed the company and, with Azure and the cloud and all these wonderful acquisitions. So that's the wild card now, but I still feel that Nvidia has that advantage. And I think it's much more than just CUDA. I think it's, we saw so much at CES around whether it's robotics and Omniverse and these digital twins. I think the tooling and the libraries, they've got like 400 AI optimized, NVIDIA GPU optimized libraries. Maybe open source can replicate that. We'll see, and maybe eventually will. But then I come back to volume. NVIDIA's got the volume lead. You remember at your panel at the NYSE, the gentleman from AMD was saying, well, we have more wafer volume than NVIDIA. And I talked to him afterwards, of course, and said, well, you don't in AI. He goes, oh, that's true. But so great, you got more x86 volume. That doesn't do you any good in the world shifting from x86 to AI and highly parallel processing. So I think I'll say this. NVIDIA's getting hurt. It's not investment advice. It's just my opinion. I think this is a buying opportunity for NVIDIA. May go down more from here, but I think NVIDIA is going to continue to have really, really strong quarters. And at one point, people are going to go, wow, when they announce their earnings, and the stock's going to be back, and they'll start running again.
I agree with you. Well, first of all, I don't think this is going to have a material impact in the short term. It will with the news, because we got sold the story that this low-cost, high-performance AI system's really going to take out NVIDIA. I think that was just a false story. I think everyone who's in that chip and systems business will thrive. I think this will mostly tip the scales on the software side and the app developers. It's going to really create a boost for what I call these AI labs and AI platform builders, the systems builders, who are going to roll out AI factories and AI refineries inside companies, whether that's in the cloud or on-prem. Both win. Cloud and on-prem win. And then ultimately the edge, whether you're a retail outlet, smaller devices with computer vision, whatever that, they're all going to get smarter instantly. I think the software key piece is huge. So again, I am very bullish on the sector of the picks and shovels. In this case, the platforms, the
I like
tooling.
Broadcom too, John.
I mean,
I like Broadcom, what they're doing with Meta. These CapEx spenders, I mean, Google and Meta, they're
yeah.
not going to stop
I mean, I use the
spending.
word chip grid because I couldn't think of a better word, but like, and Broadcom is the poster child. As you look at how they're doing their business, when they showed us at their financial analyst meeting, what they're doing with the chips, they're getting bigger. Cerebras has got the biggest chip. I love that company, but it's what's around them. So it's the design of chips to chip communication, and this is what DeepSeek did, kind of to innovate because they had no better gear. They're like the Steve Jobs and Wozniak in the garage. They had to put together some hardware to make their software work better, and it worked. Now, so that's why I think the bigger folks are already responding. You look at all the major chip people, they're responding. We can run it on ours. We're faster. I think it's going to be good for them. I don't think they're going to get hurt. And by the way, Nvidia is selling more GPUs to DeepSeek and everybody else. So they're the arms dealer, right? So like they're going to win. Broadcom, Nvidia, Cerebras. These are the companies that will take advantage of, again, the software innovation. They just get better too, faster, smaller, cheaper, as Intel used to kind of always say. So I'm look, that's key. Now, I want to get your take on the other piece because while they were selling us this story and why it came out as a low cost, low power, high performance system, the deeper implications, Dave, is the rise of the geopolitical balance of power on AI. I mean, the elephant in the room is China, right?
Yeah.
Is this a big conspiracy theory? Is DeepSeek part of a Chinese psychological operation, Psychops? A lot of people going there, talking there. What's your take? I have an opinion on this, but I want to get yours first.
Well, I do think that the Chinese government, this is what I believe, that the CCP was, in cahoots with DeepSeek and provided resources. I don't think we know the full story. I put out a tweet. I'm sure everybody's seen it by now, but it was something on Reddit where people were typing in, well, what's the story behind the image of the young man in front of a tank? And then it started to answer. You saw this, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then it was wiped out. Oh, I'm not allowed to answer that question. So, okay, so that was kind of interesting. And I do think they had access to some advanced silicon. I think from a public policy standpoint, when you go back to the diffusion, the AI technology diffusion legislation or a policy that the Biden administration put out just at the end of his tenure. We talked about this quite a bit, but China, no chips for you. Any company that's an enemy, I think that it gets solidified by Trump. I think the opportunity is that big fat tier 2 middle. I hope it's not a big regulatory capture for the hyperscalers. I hope that they open up that middle and entice people. I hope they compress that tier 2 into 2 tiers. They should put them either in tier 1 or tier 3. Either you're with us or you're against us. And the more people that are with us that we can trust, the better. And that's how I think you beat China with a broader ecosystem.
Is it their Psychops on us? What do you think?
Yeah, I do think, I definitely think there's a bouncing Betty involved here, as you say.
To me,
There's no
I
question
definitely
about
think
it.
it's a psychological operation, and because look what happened. Trump did the TikTok. We all know what's going on with what you mentioned, some of those restrictions, which, as I was saying earlier, is a blessing in disguise for them. Our export restrictions actually gave them the ability to innovate, just like Steve Jobs couldn't get chips. He got his hands on some, made a PC. So this is kind of happening here. But the mounting evidence that if you squint through the innovation and the hype around the training numbers, DeepSeek has ties to the CCP. Okay, the founder's got close connections. It's the high flyer hedge fund. Probably was shorting the stock. I guarantee you, there's no way to track it, but they probably have made more money there. They had access to government resources, political influence, and strategic alignment to China's broader ambitions. See, that's clear. That evidence is there. Two, the stock market disruption, the way they launched, the way that went down. I mean, I've seen many stock product launches and kind of game changers that sandbagged the press, got everyone excited. Everyone got hit. I mean, if you look at the $1 trillion in market cap that was lost, okay, all those vendors, Nvidia, Microsoft, Meta, all lost trillions of dollars. That was a disruption that hits Main Street America. Okay, that's a nice little paper cut right there. And then the censorship and control. You mentioned the tank at Tiananmen Square. They're self-censoring topics. So again, although they open source, as I said earlier, I don't think this was the salvo strike to end all other strikes. I think this was the one flurry of many to come. And I think they're flexing, and I think there's a lot more behind it. So to me, I think this is for us to pay attention in the U.S. and saying, you know, are we going to have a Cold War? We're going to have a collaboration. So this is going to be very interesting to watch, because I remember I said in the pod that the AI is like the Manhattan Project. Remember, that drove a lot of innovation. Certainly, atomic bomb, that was bad, but that was a wartime thing. And a lot of the debate here in Silicon Valley was around, no, a Manhattan Project is self-serving to the U.S., but a more global collaborative is better for the world. Those are two different, mutually exclusive scenarios. You can't have a Manhattan Project and an open source global innovation. Just can't. It's impossible. So what this is strategically for China is burn the village down, knock a few punches down to OpenAI and the leaders like the CapEx spenders. You know, that takes them to the mat. That's a punch that knocks them down. Kick the stock market, get some disruption there, and start setting the agenda for the open global that counteracts the restrictions. And then that's just the first salvo. So I think this is going to be interesting. This is going to be an AI Cold War era between the U.S. and China, and their triumph impressive with the breakthrough. But I think there's a strategic, bigger game going on, the geopolitical, and kind of David Sachs talks about this. You almost see the way he's talking. He's a hawk, right? So we'll see how that goes. I'm honest. That's my perspective based on what I'm seeing and reading the tea leaves. Geopolitical and this chip grid is interesting because everything you said is all going to come into it. Who's building the systems? Where's the supremacy? Is that a competitive advantage? Is that going to be a resource? And so that's just my perspective.
If you want to screw with the U.S., one of the best ways to screw with the U.S. is to screw with the stock market, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Now the other way is if you can attack critical infrastructure, but that's like an act of war. Whereas this, you know, the CCP has plausible deniability, right? And it's just
if the chips take the models, it's like a malware sitting in there. It's a zombie waiting to be turned on. There's a lot of people that don't trust this. Now, I'm not saying that's a zombie. I'm just saying the scenario would be, let's get the chips, let's change the games and make it global, but let's infiltrate the systems level. Remember we said all the alpha developers are all going down to the hardware level? They did that here. Assembler. They changed the chip configuration, the way they talk to each other at an assembler level. That's coding at the machine level. We've been saying that on theCUBE ever since we started talking a year ago.
Load a register, load a, store a.
Yeah, I mean, this is old school assembler. I'm dating myself, but you know, that was, you know, you had to be proficient in assembler when I got my CS degree in the 80s. Here, this is where the war will be fought, low-level coding. So, you know, software supply chain, you know, what does that look like when you're distilling across models? Here's an example. Say we have a proprietary model and we distill with the China model. We don't know what's distilling between the two. If they're working together, I got to verify that endpoint. So, you know, this is opening up a whole nother level. And I think the Sci-Ops is, again, one salvo, one flurry, throw a haymaker, disrupt the stock market, rattle the cage, knock down the big players, weave in censorship. That's the conspiracy theory right there. It's a dark place, I know, but that's you go there.
I like it. I think look, I think you have to be open to the possibility. It's the probability is north of zero that this is a Sci-Ops initiative from the CCP.
All right, let's get back to the positive now. Let's put okay, Dave, this is great innovation. Who wins? What's the upside here? So to me, now the positive side of me, and I leave the dark side, come back to the Jedi side. Um, Developers win. I mean, this is seeing the results in the market, and when you look at the people who are doing the analysis, developers win here. You get powerful, specialized tools to build applications on. It's cheaper to run. It runs on better hardware. The hardware gets better. So I think larger models that have the ability for small models to integrate into with diffusion could lead to cost-effective specialty models. This absolutely changes the power curve that we drew 2 years ago and supports our thesis that
Totally.
there's a long tail and then the neck and torso are going to fill up with capabilities. Still have the big whales up there, whether they're proprietary or open, the big models will be there. So the efficiencies will come in large scale resources and establishing new models, more and more coming every day. So that's number 2. 3, domain specific AI. So that's what's hot right now with these small language models is, if you are in the enterprise, if you have domain expertise, that's where all the innovation is. That's where all the value and ROI is coming. So all the enterprises have a hurdle for all the new Gen AI. If you can't show value, you mentioned it earlier, you're out. So to me, that is huge. So as you get cheaper models, you can run them with domain experts. That's going to open up agents. I think that's the positive implications of this, and it's going to make smart training happen cheaper. I don't need to, I mean, we could probably train theCUBE AI with this. So,
Yeah.
this is an efficiency game on the software side.
I
It's a
think
gift to developers, basically, in my, yeah, it's a gift.
yeah, and like I said, I think the market wins overall. I think anybody who wants to, apply AI, which is everybody, wins if there are new lower cost ways of going down the power law. I mean, that power law is to me, it was validated even further this past week, along with, I think, edge computing. One of my predictions last week in breaking analysis was, edge computing is going to show meaningful revenue in 2025. And I think this just democratizes the adoption of AI and extends it. And I think you ain't seen nothing yet. I think this is going to just explode beyond. I mean, Nvidia's getting hit. It's below 3 trillion now. Is Nvidia gonna? Is it Cisco in '99, or is it, does it have legs? And I think it's the latter.
I mean, I think Dave, the AI efficiency with the domain experts, the 3 things I mentioned. I mean, AI was dominated by the large players. Okay, large organizations with vast resources. That led to the leaders being at the head of the long tail that produced the state-of-the-art models. With DeepSeek, that flips it up on its head, because now, if you have domain expertise in a very narrow area, you can build efficient models cheaply without buying huge compute infrastructure, because the reasoning and the precision, the way they did it, that's going to allow people to do code generation, financing modeling, medical modeling, legal analysis. Every vertical now doesn't have to buy into the large costs, but they still will need to use some of the bigger models. So it doesn't make the big models go away. It just allows for, as you said, democratization, which means, hey, an organization can build their own model, put it on a server, on-prem. Again, that's why I think the Dells of the world are going to win, because it opens up massive possibilities. And I think that'll create better software, and then those hurdles in the enterprise, like resilience and security, will ultimately be met. Right now, they're stuck. There's nothing happening in the AI enterprise, because the hurdle to get approved is like going through the airport at TSA, and you got to go back again, take your shoes off. It's
by the way,
brutal.
did you see the former Microsoft engineer who put out the video on with that Tiananmen Square prompt?
No,
He
I did not.
downloaded DeepSeek, put it on his own cluster in his basement, and put the prompt into DeepSeek, and he got an answer.
Yeah.
It didn't. That was a pretty good demo.
They're also China's throttling YouTube too. I saw that in the news as well. So to promote
there you
their
go, tit for
local
tat.
YouTube.
So
yeah, so that's pretty much, Dave, what's going on. I mean, I think that's the deep dive. And in summary, I mean, to me, it's like, let's watch this. But the ripples are clear. I mean, when my phone was ringing off the hook, my relatives are calling me, hey, what's this DeepSeek thing? First it was Stargate the week before. Now it's DeepSeek. So I think TikTok shut off, DeepSeek, no, Stargate and DeepSeek back to back fodder for us on the Cube pod.
Yeah, I mean, and to your point, I think the timing was not a coincidence. And did you notice Alibaba came out with something? It kind of didn't get as much news because it was like second to, like Jensen says, you want to be first. Alibaba came out with, oh, our model is actually faster, but kind of nobody paid attention. But people should pay attention because, to your point, there's going to be a lot more of this over the next year or so. So, yeah, I look at. Do we mind competition? I mean, are we afraid of competition in the United States? I hope not.
Hey, OpenAI's got a wake-up call. I mean, I see a report here from Wired Magazine. DeepSeek has galvanized OpenAI staff who feel OpenAI must become more efficient or risk falling behind its newest competitor. So look at, I mean, just another horse on the track, but I love them action, right? I mean, there is multiple threads: efficiency, software innovation, Sci-Ops, global geopolitical, Cold War race. I mean, this is all very interesting. Very, very interesting. We'll keep tracking it. Yeah. So next week, I'll see you in New York. We got, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the calendar, Dave, but the events are popping big time this year.
I have seen the calendar, and I got a little nervous.
There is. I would say that this is probably the first year since COVID that events are more than I've ever seen leading up to around 2018. I think would be the height of the event season in terms of tech companies. I think we're back at that level, Dave. I mean, May, I think we're on the road every week in May, and April's filling up. June's got even a ton of events. So April, May, and June, tons of activity. The events are back. So of course with the studio in Palo Alto, Boston, and New York. So yeah,
yeah. I mean, thank goodness we have more people on the team this year with the analysts that also can really hang in the cube. So I'm looking forward to being in Las Vegas 100 days this year again.
I downloaded. Check out inference.cerebras.ai. That's their new R1, and it's fast. It's really, really fast. That's I was playing with that, so that was cool. All right, Dave. Well, great to chat.
Yeah, we'll see you next week.
Everyone's got any DM us and tweet us if you have comments on what we said and have input. We're still tracking everything. There's so much more commentary. I got a file on DeepSeek that's miles long. Watching CEOs weigh in and just overall, content's great. So thanks.
Interesting, right? Every CEO has weighed in. What does that tell you?
It's fashion, man. It's the new fashion. Dave, we'll see you later.
Thanks, John. We'll see you around.
See you next
Thanks,
time.
everybody.